The U.S. president also signed and sent off letters today to several countries, including two major trading partners.
The president is threatening to raise the tariffs on Japan and South Korea if they reciprocate with levies of their own.
On July 7th, President Donald Trump announced that formal letters had been sent to Japan and South Korea. Starting August 1st, all exports from these countries into the United States would face a 25% tariff. These weren't routine policy updates. They were public warnings, delivered through Truth Social, meant to pressure. And while aimed at securing trade concessions, the impact has been deeper, shaking alliances, markets, and America's global credibility.
These would be 25% tariffs on all Japanese and South Korean exports into the U.S., effective on August 1st, changes saying, quote, these tariffs may be modified upwards or downwards depending on our relationship with your country. Is that there is no certainty.
Japan and South Korea are not just trade partners. They are cornerstone allies, economically, strategically, militarily. Yet the letters treated them no differently than geopolitical rivals. The 25% tariff matches the reciprocal rate framework Trump introduced on April 2nd. South Korea had already faced this rate. Japan was at 24%. Now, both face the full increase starting August 1st, unless they open their markets to U.S. goods. Markets reacted swiftly. On July 7th, Nissan's stock fell 5%. Toyota dropped 1.25%, Honda 1.5%. U.S. indices also dipped. Dow, Nasdaq, and S&P 500 all fell about 1%. This wasn't about numbers alone. It was about trust. And trust once broken is difficult to rebuild. America's Asian alliances are now under strain not because of war, but because of a letter. The White House insists this is a calculated strategy, a show of strength, a negotiation tactic. The tariffs, they say, are conditional. If Japan or South Korea retaliate, the rates will rise further. If they open up, they might come down. But here's the catch. Behind the scenes, Treasury officials admit there's not enough bandwidth to negotiate one-on-one with over 100 countries. Many, especially smaller economies, will simply face blanket tariffs between 10% and 25%, regardless of context. Trump's executive order signed July 7th pushed the original July 9th tariff deadline to August 1st. It gave more time, but not more clarity. The administration's plan for customized deals for every country sounds powerful on paper. But without capacity to follow through, it risks becoming a chaotic patchwork of threats with no structure. And this uncertainty, what happens if deals don't materialize, is exactly what markets and foreign leaders fear. This isn't targeted protectionism. It's tariff diplomacy by pressure, and it's backfiring. With negotiations already underway, Canada wasn't among the countries that received a tariff letter. That's because it's already deep in trade talks with the U.S., with a deadline set for July 21st. Canada's recent withdrawal of its digital services tax opened the door to dialogue. But Prime Minister Mark Carney hasn't conceded further. Instead, Canada is quietly preparing domestic support packages, especially for its aluminum industry, which is still facing U.S. tariffs of up to 50%. Ottawa isn't reacting emotionally. It's planning strategically, holding the line until the U.S. either offers a reasonable deal or overreaches. Then there's China. For now, Beijing hasn't received a new tariff letter. The U.S. and China remain under a temporary tariff truce through mid-August. But officials in Beijing are watching closely. By fracturing U.S. relationships with Japan and South Korea, Trump may be doing China's work for them. Beijing isn't rushing to escalate. Instead, it's likely positioning itself to benefit from any lasting rift in the U.S.-Asia alliance system. Trump's letter may not have shocked China, but it certainly interested them. Trump's tariff letters are meant to force deals, to show strength. But they've exposed a different reality. Japan and South Korea, once among America's most reliable allies, are now bracing for economic penalties from the very country they've supported for decades. Canada is quietly resisting. And China, so far, is playing the long game, waiting for divisions to deepen. America still holds the cards. But diplomacy built on pressure alone doesn't just fail to persuade. It pushes partners away. And in a world where alliances matter more than ever, these letters may end up isolating the United States, one ally at a time.
We're going to start sending letters out to various countries starting tomorrow, and they'll range in value from maybe 60 or 70% tariffs to 10 and 20% tariffs.
On July 4th, while Americans celebrated their independence with fireworks and parades, President Donald Trump took a different approach. From the East Room of the White House, he launched the next phase of his global trade campaign, announcing that letters would be sent to countries around the world, laying out new U.S. tariff rates ranging from 10% all the way up to 70%. These tariffs, he said, would go into effect on August 1st. The message was clear: sign a deal or face the cost. With agreements already reached with Vietnam and the United Kingdom, Trump felt vindicated. But one country, just across the northern border, remains locked in an unusually tense standoff: Canada. And unlike the others this time, Trump's strategy may hit a wall.
Trump says he plans to spend part of his 4th of July holiday sending letters to countries notifying them of their new tariff rates.
We have a lot of great things going, and we're getting along with countries, but some will be disappointed because they're going to have to pay tariff.
Trump's 90 deals in 90 days campaign has picked up pace. The UK locked in a mini deal. Vietnam accepted a revised tariff schedule. According to Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent, around 100 countries could qualify for a 10% base rate if they reach terms fast. But Canada is taking a different approach. Rather than rushing into a deal, Ottawa has reopened negotiations carefully, and only after withdrawing its digital services tax to get back to the table. Even so, no agreement has been announced. What's different this time is that Canada, unlike others, seems willing to push back.
Americans are celebrating their country's past and present today on Independence Day, while Canadians are expressing concerns about what the future could hold for the Canada-U.S. relationship.
For months, trade talks between the U.S. and Canada had stalled. In late June, Trump abruptly walked away from the table after Canada moved ahead with its digital services tax, a 3% levy targeting U.S. tech giants. Days later, under pressure, Prime Minister Mark Carney repealed the tax to reopen negotiations. But the concessions stopped there. Unlike other nations, Canada hasn't rushed to finalize a new deal. Instead, it has taken a quieter, slower approach, reopening discussions but refusing to give in to every demand. That includes Trump's likely next target, Canada's dairy sector. Canada's supply management system, which uses quotas and tariffs to protect domestic milk producers, has long been a sore point for Trump. But for Canadian policymakers, it's a non-negotiable pillar of economic sovereignty. Reforms would require political capital, cross-provincial consensus, and potentially an act of parliament. Though dairy was not officially raised, the idea of including it in the talks has triggered political backlash in Canada. And so far, Carney has not signaled any willingness to make concessions. This resistance is more than symbolic. If no agreement is reached by the July 21st deadline, Canada could face tariffs as high as 70% on its steel, aluminum, and auto exports, sectors deeply integrated into U.S. supply chains. The risk here is mutual. According to Statistics Canada, over 75% of Canadian automotive exports, roughly 80 billion Canadian dollars per year, go directly to the United States. Meanwhile, U.S. manufacturers rely heavily on Canadian inputs, especially in the Great Lakes region. Trump's escalating tactics may spark retaliation, not just diplomatically, but economically. If the U.S. imposes sweeping tariffs on Canada, it could disrupt cross-border supply chains, increase prices for U.S. consumers, and trigger political blowback in Midwestern states.
I think the reality is we're dealing with a president who is incredibly abnormal and not something we're used to.
Trump's tariff-first strategy has delivered quick deals in some cases. But with Canada, the calculus is different. This is not a developing economy adjusting its terms to avoid disruption. It's a G7 ally, with the economic weight and political structure to absorb short-term pressure. By pushing too hard, Trump may risk breaking a relationship that has long benefited both nations. A deal is still possible. But if the U.S. insists on unconditional surrender, Canada may choose to walk. And if that happens, July 21st won't just mark a failed negotiation. It could mark the beginning of something far more costly, the unraveling of North America's most vital trade alliance.
The only thing that can't be created here is an end to the tariffs.
It's affected me pretty severely. The main thing being the complete drop-off of our American sales momentum.
It's our plan to say, let's produce as much as we can in Canada.
In 2025, Donald Trump launched a new round of tariffs. Cars not made in the US, 25%, aluminum, steel, lumber, more tariffs. His message was simple: bring factories home, punish foreign suppliers, rebuild American industry. But just months into this effort, the consequences are taking shape, and they're not what the White House promised. Canadian firms are pulling back, US businesses are scrambling, and everyday Americans are paying more for cars, groceries, even homes.
Ron Marcolin says many businesses in the region have focused on growing trade with Europe and India. A recent survey conducted by the group shows the tariffs continue to negatively impact businesses across Canada.
Across Canada, the message was clear. The US was no longer a stable trade partner. In New Brunswick, glassmaker Curtis Dion saw his US sales vanish. In 2024, buyers from the US made up 10% of his business. In 2025, that number dropped to 0. Schneider Electric, a global energy firm, made its own move. It expanded production at its plant in Brossard, Quebec, boosting capacity by 30% and hiring 17 new workers. The goal wasn't growth for its own sake. It was a pivot away from dependency. The company said it planned to produce as much as we can in Canada, regardless of what happened across the border. And the data supported this shift. According to Statistics Canada, in May 2025, exports to the US declined, while exports to other countries surged nearly 6%, a record. That shift wasn't symbolic. It was structural. Canada also holds strategic leverage. Ontario briefly floated a 25% surcharge on electricity exports to the US chlorine, aluminum, and softwood lumber, key ingredients for US infrastructure and consumer goods, largely come from Canadian sources. And if tariffs push them out, the alternatives will be slower, pricier, and less secure.
One thing's for sure, cars are about to get more expensive in the US.
Aluminum's a whole different world. There's a reason why it was outsourced to begin with.
We have to ask ourselves, what are the reasons why we don't produce enough in this country?
Inside the US, many companies are caught off guard. Big brands like Walmart stocked up early. Their imports from China jumped 33% in 2024. But small firms didn't have that luxury. Deer Stags, a footwear company, imports 98% of its shoes from China. With no room to stockpile, they now face tariffs over 16%, pulled directly from their bank account by US Customs. At ITS Logistics in Fort Worth, Texas, companies rushed to store goods before tariffs kicked in. But that came at a cost: warehousing, shipping, compliance. It all adds up, and all of it gets passed to the customer. For businesses without deep pockets, this isn't protection, it's punishment. That brings us to the people who have no choice but to absorb it all: American consumers. In March 2025, the aluminum tariff was raised to 25%. By May, the US Midwest aluminum premium had jumped more than 60%, according to S&P Global. Coca-Cola warned it may shift more packaging to plastic to avoid the impact. In the auto sector, the fallout was sharper. The average transaction price for new cars in the US neared $50,000 in February 2025. With tariffs, analysts from Cox Automotive projected price hikes between 15% and 20% for cars built outside the US, or made with foreign parts. That's roughly $6,000 added per vehicle. The construction industry was hit too. CoreLogic estimated that tariffs on steel, aluminum, and Canadian lumber could raise the price of a newly built home by $22,000 over the next 12 months. That's on top of a market where over 100 million American households already can't afford the median home price. Trump promised a revival: factories, jobs, American steel. But reality moves slower. New aluminum smelters take up to 10 years. Sawmills can't ramp up overnight. Labor shortages and environmental limits stand in the way. Meanwhile, Canada is already moving forward, cutting exposure to U.S. risk and finding new markets. And back in the U.S., it's not China or Mexico footing the bill. It's the small manufacturers, the independent builders, the families trying to buy their first home. Trump called it a trade strategy, but to many Americans, it's starting to look like a bill they can't afford